I will be discussing Nancy Jo Hoffman's Reading Women's Poetry, The Meaning and Our Lives, an article I'll be using for Paper 2 in analyzing Anne Sexton's For Kind. The poem is an arena into which we enter to change ourselves and each other. At the end of Hoffman's class, Poetry and the Female Consciousness, this sentiment was shared with the class by a female student. In this article, Hoffman emphasizes the importance of communally reading poetry and reflecting upon everyone's personal experiences in order to formulate a coherent description of the poem in hand. As she did with her own class, Hoffman introduces reader to Denise Levertov's The Pulse. This poem describes a moment of fleeting freedom as the flower petals reveal the poetic speaker to the world. But just as quickly as the petals blossom, they retract, leaving the speaker trapped inside once again to wait in the dark for future moments of freedom. A student, frustrated at the absolute lack of control the speaker has over their own existence, explained that Levertov is simply affirming once more that women are unable to shape their own lives. Hoffman agrees that women's poetry and literature present women as victims of their own powerlessness, not as figures in control of their own fate. It's a process in which women can undergo a positive change that Hoffman is adamantly looking to identify within the realm of poetry. She suggests that instead of analyzing poetry by merely noting the imagery, poetic world, and poet's background, feminist readers should make the connection between the poem and their personal lives in order to create a new understanding. That being said, readers should not dismiss the poet's past or choose to read only poems of positive change, but rather they should apply personal reflections, experiences, and feelings into their explication process. She believes that this mediation between the life of poetry and its reader can produce both a healthy knowledge of oneself and of art. Hoffman explores the two problematic methods used in feminist criticism, and then offers a third method of reading and understanding poetry. The first method involves the reconstruction of female stereotypes created and perpetuated by the male-dominated world of literature. A few of these involve the fallen woman, the bitch, the whore, and the virgin, many of which are used as caricatures symbolizing medieval ideas such as jealousy, maidenhood, and death. These are not fleshly types of women, but abstract ones. She writes that either the male critic deliberately ignored the female consciousness or was simply ignorant of there being one. Hoffman qualifies that while the recognition of these images is useful for criticism, it does little to help women students establish individual identities as they need a sense of process. The second method is that of the traditional analysis of motifs and themes in poetry. This method catalogs the patterns of women's lives, the commonly shared inner or psychological realities the stereotypes ignore. It's with this critical tool that we examine the awakenings, our coming-of-age stories, like first sexual experiences, marriage, childbirth, motherhood, a first affair, middle age. This kind of criticism deals not with the status, but with process. But it too raises a different problem. It's in this field of criticism that women might be subjected to particular paths that their nature as women of inner female reality would inevitably lead them down. An example that Hoffman uses to demonstrate her point is the end of Kate Chopin's The Awakening, in which Edna, through her growth in independence and self-awareness, chooses then to commit suicide. Hoffman states that instead of encouraging any sort of journey of self-understanding, this ending only threatens to annihilate our courage, that we as students and women have the strength of will, the power to change. These patterns point to the fact that we desperately need new alternative positive patterns. The third method Hoffman offers incorporates the idea of language and experience in relating to poetry. Many female students Hoffman taught spoke about the conflict between inner realities and expectations imposed by society, thus leaving them wondering how their unique way of being fit into the world. Hoffman cites British psychiatrist R.D. Laing and his idea that both in reality and literature, women's state of suffering, madness, and even suicide stems from this conflict. He draws the conclusion that we should pose feelings of genuineness, substantiality, consistency, and worth against the more negative state of one's being. Through this language, there is an antidote to the static stereotypes and a mode by which themes or patterns in women's lives can be explained and altered. This should progress toward harmony with an acknowledged self where no one stereotype of the well-adjusted woman prevails. Her third method, essentially, stresses the fact that women need a vision of the future where a model of positive process of change exists, where there is an affirmation that together women can construct alternative roles and worlds where they can be autonomous, genuine, worthy, consistent, and substantial. If this process does not exist within women's literature, it can come alive through communal reading among women who strive to define criticism as mediation between poetry and their own lives. Hoffman describes the two results of this new criticism, the first being, in an atmosphere of informality, women put their varied lives to work, proving the vitality, heightened perception, potentiality for seeing beyond the self in isolation comes in reading communally. This process is a positive one. The second is that it forces women to ask questions about life. How could the process of authentic change in this poem be used in our lives? How do specific aspects of my personality, like fears, insecurities, prejudices, affect my particular understanding of the work? It is through this method that a process of positive change for the reader is established and can be examined and evaluated by the community of readers. It is through this method that the poem becomes an arena into which we enter to change ourselves and each other.